Previously on 49cc Scoot. I started working on my first scooter after 11 years collecting dust. I modified the front forks, installed a 220mm front disc brake, mounted a pair of radiators for a liquid-cooled conversion, redesigned the tail section, installed a stage 6 speedometer, and swapped in my old TPR 86cc engine. Mechanically, the scooter was nearly done at this point. I added a low-profile pod filter from Amazon instead of trying to figure out how to fit an airbox, and I changed the main jet from 102 to 110 and raised the needle one position to keep the tune at a safe starting point. I also installed new grips to match the wheels. The rest of the work to get T1 ready for its first trip down the road was bodywork. I started out with the seat bucket, which was separated most of the way around both of the rear mounts. I used a bunch of hot staples to get as much support as I could. You may notice I did not try to push the pieces back together, but instead stapled them as they sat because I hoped that that may make it less likely to crack again. Large zip ties were melted and blended in to fill the voids, though I've since been told that using a piece of the same material would be much more successful since zip ties are nylon and the seat is ABS. I'm sure this could be sanded and filled more as needed to make it look pretty good, but I left it like this. I ended up using a new seat bucket that I had anyway, but at least this is a little bit better spare now. I turned my attention to the rear section, which is made up of a few panels that I joined with Gorilla Tape because some of the tabs were broken and they wouldn't stay in place very well otherwise. All of the tape had to come off, and then tons of residue was left to remove, which I did using a product called Goof off. I'd recommend keeping a can around for tape and sticker residue, and it's been good for some other tough cleanups as well without being so harsh like some cleaners. I repaired a tab on the under seat panel with a piece saved from the holes that I cut into the leg shield when I was trying to get airflow to the radiators. Once again, not an attractive repair, but it seems sturdy enough to do its job. I also made tabs to replace the broken ones on both rear side plastics and hot stapled those on. Next, I started working on joining both of the rear side panels. There's no reason that they need to be separate, so I thought it would be best to turn them into a single part, beginning by using the one remaining fastening point that still sort of worked, and then stapling down the seam. That got me into another process that I have very little experience with when I began trying to reinforce the joint with fiberglass. First off, the blurry shots that you'll see aren't some sort of artsy idea that I had, but more evidence that my camera has failed me repeatedly on autofocus lately, even though the camera and lens were recently replaced. Anyway, I'm not sure that it's the right way to do it, but any holes that I didn't want resin spilling out of were covered with a couple of layers of masking tape from the other side before any resin was applied. I cut out pieces of fiberglass cloth to fit every spot that I planned to do in the first couple of attempts because resin hardens quickly, so there's no time to mess around once it's mixed. Then I applied a coating of resin where each piece of the cloth would go, then stuck the cloth in place and dabbed more resin in with a 1-inch chip brush. I did 2 layers with drying time between them, because I had seen people saying that multiple layers could be applied together, but my first experience with fiberglass was absolutely awful because the resin never cured, so I was afraid it may happen to me again. I also applied 2 coats of resin to all of the mounting tabs and pedestals to reinforce those. You can see that there are some air pockets that I couldn't work out in the complex areas with lots of lumps and bumps, but I figured as long as most of the patch was secure, those shouldn't be an issue. At this point, the panels felt pretty securely joined, but I was missing the small panel that goes around the fuel filler on the gas tank. I looked where I used to be able to find body panels for this bike, and it was out of stock for good, and I didn't have much luck elsewhere, so a $10 panel turned into another first for me when I decided I could make my own panel out of fiberglass. I started with a rubbing to help me make a cereal box template. After fine-tuning and trimming, the piece matched up well. I needed the template to hold its shape and to maintain the proper angle at the bend, so I hot glued some ribs on the underside for support. Clear shelf liner was put on the top of the template so I could apply fiberglass without having the template stick to it. I did 2 layers and then let it dry, then marked the outline of the template onto the fiberglass just in case the 2 separated while I trimmed the shape. The template wound up being roughed up enough that I wouldn't want to use it again, but at least the panel seemed sturdy enough to work. The shape wound up being a little off, so I heated and bent it just a little for a better fit. I drilled a hole and screwed the front down where it would normally attach, but I never thought about the tab that holds it in the back when I made it, so I just taped the whole thing down. I put 1 layer of fiberglass across most of the panel, leaving the front where the screw and the clip were alone. Once that dried, I removed the screw and the clip and cut away the bump where the clip was, before applying a large sheet to cover the whole area, and a couple of extra pieces for the part that I skipped the first time, and a spot near the front that I thought needed reinforcement. I moved on to prepping the fairing that goes below the floorboard for fiberglass repairs. I got rid of the old plastic repair epoxy that I had put on cracks. Then drilled a hole at the end of the line to prevent cracks from spreading before stapling. The panel also had issues with every pedestal mount that secures it to the floorboard. Some were just cracked, but others were missing pieces or broken completely off. For the intact but cracked mounts, I made aluminum collars to fit snug and hold the plastic together, assuming that adding fiberglass resin would glue everything in place and fill the worn out screw holes. This pedestal was partially broken off, so I made a piece of plastic on the lathe to match up and hot stapled it in place, later adding an aluminum collar and resin to that as well. This mount was totally gone, so I made a steel bracket with a stud welded on and a plastic spacer to keep me from cracking the plastic when I bolted it in place. An aluminum part screws onto that, and then a plastic piece for a screw to go in was later tapped in and resined. Once the mounts were all figured out, I did 2 layers of fiberglass on the cracked areas and assembled the mount mods with resin. The front fairing needed attention as well, beginning with removing some dim LED turn signals that I embedded into the panel. I thought the front access panel, or accent panel, whatever you call it, would look better if it were joined to the fairing and eventually blended in, so I fastened it on with hot staples. The base area for a mounting bolt was cracked, so I heated a thick washer and melted it in, similar to what I was doing with the staples, and then tried to build up around it with plastic welding. A couple of layers of fiberglass were added to all repairs, as well as 2 spots where I hope to mount turn signals later for extra reinforcement. That wrapped up my adventures with fiberglass, so filling and finish work could now begin. I had to cut out holes that I needed in the rear panel assembly that had been fiberglassed over, and then cut a hole in the homemade panel for the filler neck to go through. Grinding, sanding, and drilling fiberglass would be a good time to wear a mask or respirator. The dust for that was not pleasant. I sanded and cleaned each panel and began applying body filler as needed. This was probably a much longer process than it should have been, because I'd sand and then add more filler and then sand again and keep that up until it felt smooth and looked good to me. Holes were drilled for the front turn signal. Eventually, the panels seemed good enough for me, so I hung them up and gave them 2 coats of rattle can primer. I was supposed to go to a friend's house the next morning, so rather than be sensible and just take another scooter over, I got up early and rushed to assemble the body because I was excited to ride T1 for the first time in so many years. Now I'm going to do what they do in all of the big TV and streaming shows and leave you with a cliffhanger of my untested first ride to wrap this video up. So make sure you're subscribed to find out how it goes and catch all future updates. And please like the video if you've enjoyed it or found it helpful. Thank you for watching.